fell. Al-Sharaa rose, and the people hoped. Just 3 months later, it is more than likely that some of those on that square on that day in Latakia are now dead. As is the dream of a Syria for one and all, it is one of the Middle East's most diverse nations, home to Arabs and Kurds, Armenians, Circassians and Turkomans, Sunnis, Alawites, Christians, Druze, Yazidis and Jews, a melting pot and, if mishandled, a tinderbox, as everyone well knew.
The fall of the House of Assad could well ignite a sectarian war between the Shiites and the majority Sunnis of the region, drawing in Iran, which in the view of Israeli commanders would not be a bad thing for Israel and its Western allies. In addition, certain senior Israeli intelligence analysts believe that this turn of events may even prove to be a factor in the eventual fall of the current government of Iran.
And having read that memo, out Hillary Clinton went, advocating for Assad's demise, advocating, really, for slaughter.
It's time for Assad to get out of the way.
Assad will still have to go.
The world will not waver. Assad must go.
While behind the scenes, the notorious USAID, now exposed as little more than a front for the CIA, did what it did best. Looked for pressure points, collaborated with the opposition, funded journalists. $15 billion over 10 years. The CIA, in the meantime, launched one of its most expensive operations ever to train and arm moderate Syrian rebels, and then expressed horror and surprise when the weapons they'd gifted somehow ended up in the hands of ISIS, those terrorists, of course, that they'd vowed to take out.
The conflict armament research has documented and traced numerous weapon systems in service with IS forces. Many derive from shipments made to the U.S. government or to entities operating under U.S. government contracts. The United States has acknowledged its support to Syrian opposition forces, orchestrated primarily through resupply from the territories of Jordan and Turkey.
Humanitarian aid was also sometimes diverted, hijacked apparently by al-Qaeda's Syrian affiliate, the al-Nusra Front. You'll have heard of it, of course, because al-Sharaa, a.k.a. al-Jilani, well, he is al-Nusra's founding father. And while Washington publicly was distraught over this aiding and abetting of jihadists, behind closed doors...
Al-Qaeda's on our side in Syria.
Because, after all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, isn't he? And is a terrorist really a terrorist if we share a few dreams? And yes, civilian casualties are sad, but thousands of kilometers away in a region we've already bombed into oblivion? Well, Obama's chief of staff certainly saw no problems there.
Mr. McDonough questioned how much it was in America's interest to tamp down the violence in Syria. He argued that the status quo in Syria could keep Iran pinned down for years. In later discussions, he also suggested that a fight in Syria between Hezbollah and al-Qaeda would work to America's advantage, according to congressional officials.
Not just to America's advantage, but to Israel's too. This was a conflict that, on a long-term basis, tied up Hezbollah and Iranian forces and depleted some of their arms supplies, while also distracting from the Holy Land's own military adventurism closer to home. Mightily convenient. So Israel also sent some weaponry the moderate rebels' way, and in times of need was by their side.
There have been reports that Israel has been treating wounded Syrian rebel fighters in its hospitals on the border, including fighters from Nusra Front, which is, of course, the al-Qaeda proxy in Syria. Do those reports worry you that Israel's helping wounded al-Qaeda-aligned fighters?
As I said before, in a different context, it's always useful also to deal with your enemies in a humane way. And I think that when you have people who are wounded and you can deal with them in a humane way, the considerations as to whether to take them in are not simply whether it's politically useful or whether it's politically
So it's purely
contributory.
humanitarian, you say? So there's no tactical or political strategic...
I didn't say there's no tactical. I said the main consideration, the immediate consideration is humane.
An added bonus, of course, was that Assad wouldn't have the strength to open up a second front and push them out of the Golan Heights, which, for as long as that butcher in Damascus remained, could never be ceded.
Will your administration, the Biden administration, continue to see the Golan Heights as part of Israel?
Look, leaving aside the legalities of that question, as a practical matter, the Golan is very important to Israel's security as long as Assad is in power in Syria.
Yes, let's not get bogged down in international law. So the Golan Heights were crucial to Israeli security while Assad was around, but he's now gone, so they can be returned. No, of course not. It turns out that the new guy is worse than the old guy.
Al-Julani took off his galabiya, put on a suit, and presented a moderate facade. Now he has removed the mask, revealing his true face, a jihadist terrorist from the al-Qaeda school committing atrocities against the Alawite civilian population.
So to protect us from this monster we helped create, we're not just sitting tight, we're setting up shop. Now, coincidentally, or not, al-Sharaa has proved to be a relative friend to Israel. In all these months at the helm, amidst IDF drone attacks and missile strikes, amid civilian casualties, amid the rolling of Israeli tanks ever further into the buffer zone, he's only offered one or two soft rebukes, a sharp contrast to the hell that he has threatened to unleash on his own people, which, and I come back to my original point, was all too predictable, as we ourselves pointed out almost a decade ago.
If the Syrian government were to just immediately fall, what would happen to Syrian Christians? What would happen to Syrian Alawites?
Look, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals about a situation that we're actually obviously trying to avoid. It isn't about the fall of the regime. We are trying to get to a transitional process of governance that preserves even some of the existing infrastructure going forward, but that at the end of that process gets us to a government that is put in place by the Syrian people, with their voices being heard, and it doesn't include Bashar al-Assad.
And then, amidst the wide jubilation of the long-awaited toppling of Assad, a voice of caution rang out again.
I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It
is
be.
certainly
and
not in our interest.
And no one did anything. Actually, that's not true. The US, UK, EU, they partially lifted sanctions on Syria. They visited al-Sharaa in Damascus. They invited him to Brussels. And now, so uncharacteristically, they've lost their voices and are not speaking up. But why would they? Because what is happening is exactly what they knew would happen, what they worked towards for decades. And what they'll no doubt say is, in the words of Madeleine Albright,
I think that is a very hard choice. But the price, we think, the price is worth it.